you very much, David. So our last speaker today is Dr. Maria Llcheva, Senior Scholar at FIU Metropolitan Center. Dr. Llcheva is an Assistant Research Professor and Senior Researcher at the FIU Metropolitan Center and has over 10 years of experience in behavioral research, including public opinion polls, focus groups, and interviews on a variety of topics with different target groups. Since 2007, she leads the data collection and analysis of hurricane mitigation research at the Metropolitan Center. Research topics over the years have included insurance market, risk reduction, evacuations, government measures for mitigation of loss of critical infrastructure, location and protection, and sea level rise effects. Thank you, Maria.
I was going to say good afternoon, but we're not quite there yet. I have the honor of being the closing speaker, and that's actually to my advantage because I will bring your attention to all the issues that we've covered throughout the day. Obviously, you know the topic is on preparedness, but we started with Dr. Murray explaining about our goal to develop this holistic, comprehensive, integrated approach to community development. And certainly how we respond and prepare to disasters, which are an everyday or every year occurrence in our lives in South Florida, is part of that agenda. You can't have community development without paying attention to the economy or to housing, and preparedness, resilience from the perspective of how we respond to hurricanes plays a major role in that. So as Tiffany mentioned, we've been doing this research for over 10 years now, and we pride ourselves in being the longest standing barometer to public opinion with regards to what measures people take to prepare for hurricanes and what measures they are willing to take in the future. We have 12 years of data now, and I'll present some of the results, but I'll kind of pull back from just the public opinion data and present to you the bigger framework within which we place this long-term research. So my big, oops, I moved too fast. My big question is how can we develop this culture of preparedness and resilience? And I want to distinguish between those two terms, preparedness and resilience, with regards to their short and long-term impacts. Preparedness, when we think about preparedness, we typically think about what we do at the beginning of hurricane season, or most of us immediately before a hurricane strikes. Well, when we think about resilience in the context of hurricanes or natural disasters in general, we're generally thinking about how do we adapt to them in the longer run in order to be able to avoid any long-term harm if and when the disaster hits. Let me give you a few of the highlights from the research, and again, it's a long questionnaire that we use. I won't bore you through with all the details throughout the presentation, just with the ones that are more relevant indicators about where we stand and where we are going. I want to focus your attention on those two which I highlighted, the 2 years. In which the data showed spikes as a result of hurricanes, and that's something very common sense, right? We think about hurricanes when the impact is impending, or immediately the year after them. Our 12-year data unfortunately shows that we have a very limited attention time span, only about 2 years. So if we have 3 or more years without a major hurricane impacting our area, South Florida or the state of Florida, our research is statewide, I forgot to mention that. Generally, we see a decline in preparedness, in how people view their vulnerabilities and how they assess the risk from hurricanes. If you look at the bottom line, that's actually one of the more disturbing findings that I keep focusing on in my research. The percentage of people who said they would only evacuate if ordered, not when a hurricane warning is issued or under any other circumstance. And we have, in subsequent slides, we have a substantial percentage. Actually, 1 in 4 people would not evacuate under any circumstance. We've looked at the data in multiple ways. I'll show some of the other results in a minute. But now I want to give you the big picture, the bigger framework. When we talk about vulnerability, and that's how people also should assess their vulnerabilities. I'm saying should, not that they do it necessarily. But vulnerability is based on the assessment of 3 primary conditions. First, obviously, is the exposure. How big is the threat of hurricanes? Anybody know what our threat is this year? Colorado State University publishes those probabilities usually in April, so they came out about a month ago. And they're saying that South Florida has a 27% chance of being hit by a hurricane. Dr. Murray mentioned some statistics from Wilma. Obviously, any hurricane is a big threat to us, not just a major one. For the state of Florida, the threat is 67%. So that's a pretty high probability that we will have a hurricane event again. When we talk about exposure, that's what we talk about. We are in the danger zone, always, each and every year. Second, the second set of conditions pertain to resistance. And when we talk about resistance, we are thinking about housing structures. How able are those housing structures and those our systems, in general infrastructure, response from public agencies, able to avoid harm to residents, to businesses, to anyone in the impacted area. And the third set of conditions is about adaptive capacity. Now this is where resilience, this is where the long-term view comes into play. How do we create those comprehensive systems that will allow us, when the disaster hits, for us to recover quickly with minimal interruption and continue on with our lives as residents, business people, and whatever the other case it may be. So with that in mind, let me tell you a few facts about exposure. So obviously, hurricanes have always been a major threat. The chance of more intense storms is increasing. The science of hurricanes says that although we may see a decline in the number of storms, the number of more intense Category 4 and 5 hurricanes will increase. With that context, we also see a very high exposure from the perspective of populations who are exposed to it. Obviously, the coastal areas in Florida and including South Florida have been the fastest growing ones, and we have had experienced over the last 5 to 6 decades significant gains in population and coastal development. You see Miami-Dade County has always been the largest county, but Broward and Palm Beach have gained population to make them the second and third largest counties now. So South Florida is the area that is under the biggest threat with the biggest exposure to hurricanes, is also the area that's experiencing the fastest population growth and development. What about resistance? I mentioned this is about some of the indicators on that in those conditions, resistance conditions pertain to structures. Not just structures, but also infrastructure and other factors. You heard some of these statistics mentioned. Here I'm taking a more regional approach. Tiffany mentioned this is what the South Florida area various agencies are doing as well. So 85% of homes were built prior to 2000. Ned mentioned the Miami-Dade Code. Actually, the statewide code, new building code, it took 10 years after Andrew for communities, for officials to agree on it. It took effect in 2002. So most of the properties, when we look at those that are able statewide to withstand, that are built to code, as we say, were a very small percentage of those properties were built, actually exist in our state and in South Florida. This is where the economy comes into play. You've heard the numbers about median wages and cost burden households. Given that we have such a high percentage of homes that may be not up to code, that may require significant improvements in order to withstand even smaller hurricanes, obviously these homes would require improvements, and those improvements are not within the range of possibility for many of the households in South Florida. I read some, there is an organization that does surveys every year about the amount of savings Americans have, and actually over 60% of Americans, I believe that's probably larger in Miami given the lack of affordability and low wages here. So that percent for the United States is over 60. So over 60% have less than $1,000 in savings. That means they don't have the sufficient income to invest in their properties. And most likely those are the least resilient individuals and households, because if their home is destroyed, if their business is destroyed, we need to cover that side as well. They will not be able to adapt and to continue on with their lives as others would. So I put some numbers about what's required to bring those homes up to code, and the numbers are staggering. As I said, for a small home, just to elevate a concrete slab home, it will cost upward of $60,000. Impact windows additional, new roof additional, so you can imagine how the numbers actually add up. All right, so the final piece, the final set of conditions pertain to adaptive capacity or resilience. And there are two, I'm distinguishing between two set of factors within this indicator of vulnerability. Some of them pertain to what we know and how aware we are of the risk. Dave mentioned the risk is often sometimes, he mentioned it on the public and private side, but I can say based on our statistics that the risk is also not assessed accurately by individuals and households. So when they decide when to purchase a home, where to purchase a home, and how much they're paying for the home, they rarely figure out that there are additional costs, maybe for, as I mentioned, bringing the home up to code, insurance payment, homeowner insurance payment, flood insurance payment. So a lot of people, especially given interest from abroad in our properties, are likely not fully aware of those risks. And then the other part of that argument, of that factor, is resources. Where we are in terms of our ability to invest in these improvements to improve our long-term resilience obviously depends on how much disposable income we have and how much stability we have in our economy. If there is a major threat which disrupts in the way Kevin mentioned, transportation and logistics, tourism, the service sector in general, people who live paycheck to paycheck and who experience any damage to their home and livelihood simultaneously will be in significant trouble. So let's compare how... Did I jump again? Okay. So when we talk about the resilience drivers, here are just a couple of numbers. One of the troubling things, we generally cover it extensively in our research, is how wages and the economy is changing over time. And when we adjust for inflation, unfortunately, we are not growing. In terms of wages, even though the economy as a whole is growing, in terms of wages, we are not as a community. 1 in 3 households, again, these are figures for South Florida, for the region, are cost burdened, and these are the households that probably cannot spend any money at all on mitigation measures. In terms of knowledge and awareness, and this is from our survey data, this is a very positive statistic. Over the years, knowledge and awareness has grown from 2006 to 2010. It was generally in the mid-90s. Then it declined a little bit, and now we are seeing it increasing again as a result of, I mentioned, of more recent hurricane experience. Yet, despite that finding that people know and are aware of hurricanes, and they believe they have enough information to prepare for such disasters, here are some contradictory statistics. We are aware of the hurricanes, and this is related to what I mentioned earlier with regards to understanding of risk, an accurate assessment of risk. Only about, in the low 50s, only about 50%, small majority, feel vulnerable to hurricanes. We do a couple of, this is a good time to mention that, link it kind of to the sea level rise, to the more, what people see, the more long-term threat. More people actually indicated in the upper 70%, usually around 77%, indicated that they believe in the science, that sea level rise is happening. However, only about 41 to 44% over the years believe it will impact them. And it's the same story with regards to vulnerability to hurricanes. It doesn't, as I said, we do this poll every year. It's a statewide poll with oversampling in coastal communities. When we distinguish between inland and coastal communities, there is no significant variation. In other words, people in coastal communities don't feel more threatened or vulnerable than those living inland. That is a very troubling statistic. And with regards to evacuation, I promised I'll give you that statistic. If you look at the bottom of that table, as I said, 1 in 4 people in South Florida would never evacuate. That's higher than the rest of Florida. Again, the area with the largest exposure, with the population that is so unprepared to a large extent because of economic circumstance, is not willing to evacuate. So do we have a culture of resilience? As I said, when we talk about resilience, and typically people have focused on the long-term risk assessment, which we hedge by buying property insurance. Over the years, again, this was a question we've asked continuously because we thought insurance rates have never decreased; they typically increase, and we hypothesized that the higher the insurance rates, the more likely are people to drop their insurance because of affordability and because of the need to spend on other family expenses. And generally, this has been proven right. We actually did focus groups several years ago, and we asked individuals specifically that question. Well, are you aware of the risk? Why would you drop your insurance if you know what that risk is? Some of them said, well, I'll just save money on my own. Others said, I'm willing to take that risk. I just cannot afford the insurance rates. That was about 7 years ago, and as we know, the rates have increased even further. So if you look at the third set of bars here, currently in the rest of Florida, about 1 in 6, 1 in 7 individuals said that they would drop their insurance if they didn't have a mortgage, if they weren't required to have it. And in South Florida, it's 1 in 5. Again, exposure, risk assessment, and ability of people to pay for their resilience, for their long-term recovery, all are in play here. All right, I'll wait for this to appear fully. So where nature and the human factors intersect, unfortunately, I don't have a very good message here. We're continuing to grow exponentially. The growth has slowed down a little bit, but by 2040, our population will increase by another 26%. One thing that we've been looking at in recent years is who comes here and who moves out, and we've looked at migration figures. We have about over the last 7 years, 2010 to 17, we have over about 500,000 people come from abroad. Now, what's the challenge in that? A lot of they come from different walks of life, different countries, but the majority of them do not have any of that hurricane experience that long-term South Florida residents have. I don't know if you paid attention in your neighborhoods, but during Irma I evacuated, but when I came back 3 days later, I saw a lot of my neighbors with duct tape and painter's tape on their windows. And we thought we had gone beyond that. That's what happens when people are not sufficiently aware about what the risk is and what the adequate preparation measures actually entail. And then on the economic side, insurance rates, as I said, are increasing. What I put here for you in the second rectangle is from the Florida Department of Insurance Regulation. These are median rates that are offered as a sample from various companies on their website. And these are not for properties that are very high priced, if you notice. These are properties that for many of us are within for some of us are within the affordability range, and for probably about a third are beyond it. So what is the future? This is my last slide, and I won't cover all of these. I think Julie covered some of them, and some of the other speakers also talked about the need to make hard decisions, the need to make accurate assessments of where we are as a community and where we intend to be in the long run. But in line with the quotes that some of my panelists have mentioned, I'll mention one that's pertinent to hurricanes. Every year a hurricane doesn't hit us directly. We say we are lucky, right? Well, the quote goes like this: luck is the residue of design. And by design, you can extend it to not just think about building design, but planning and preparation. It's not about being lucky. It's not about hoping that the hurricane won't impact us directly. It's about being prepared in the short run to respond to it and being resilient enough in the future so that we can recover once it hits us. Thank you very much. This is my last slide. A reminder, those of you who haven't heard, this is National Hurricane Preparedness Week. We're still in it, so start early. Don't wait for the empty shelves in the stores or the lack of plywood in Home Depot if you're doing that still. Thank you.